And after the meeting, the COSA of the couple, heard a little bit of our story and said, you might want to look at how it is you picked an SAA out of a crowded room. That was 21 years ago this month. And I really have never stopped going to COSA since. I could not ignore that truth, that statement. The deeper I looked, I realized that I'd actually picked an incest survivor out of a crowded room. And it made perfect sense. My mom was an incest survivor. My partner's an incest survivor. A strange part of my brain just felt right at home.
You're listening to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast, a place for sex addicts to share their experiences of recovery, to help break the stigma, myths, and misconceptions of sex addiction. This podcast may contain topics of sexuality, sexual trauma, dysfunction, or other things that may be triggering, so listener discretion is advised. Hello, and welcome to the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. My name is Jason, I'm a sex addict, and I am your podcast host. What's going on, everyone? Welcome to episode 189 of the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast. This week, I'm happy to be sharing the recording from the May SAA and COSA Speaker meeting. Usually, I have more episodes in between the quarterly speaker meetings. I had just recently published episodes 186 and 187 from the February speaker meeting, and only one episode before sharing this one. For the February meeting, I got the links very late, and I also had delays in what I was doing for the podcast due to building the website, and this one I got the link early. Although I have two other recordings to share, those were much longer conversations, and since I have been really busy over the past few weeks getting ready for the SAA conference, which just happened this weekend, I thought it would be much easier to share a short episode. So this will be featuring Chris C. speaking for COSA. The SAA speaker for May did not want to be recorded, and so I won't be able to share that. But I'm so grateful that Chris C. allowed us to use this for the podcast. So I got to meet Chris earlier this year at the open meeting for COSA that they do every January called New Beginnings. And I was really grateful to hear his share at the speaker meeting. One of the things that he did talk about was being a man in a COSA meeting and how it felt to be the only man in the room. And so for the reading this week, I went to the COSA website and found a page there called Men in COSA. And I wanted to read that before getting to Chris's share. So it says, Tradition 3, the only requirement for COSA membership is that our lives have been affected by compulsive sexual behavior. As our society of recovery from the effects of compulsive sexual behavior grows and evolves, it is remarkable to note the overwhelming predominance of female COSA members and to wonder if these issues are somehow particular to women. Upon consultation with experts in human sexual research and upon listening to our members' stories, we find ample proof that no, these are not gender-specific issues. As a result of an increase in public awareness of our plight, an increasing number of men are identifying themselves as having been affected by compulsive sexual behavior and are seeking relief. Yet, in your local area, you may find yourself the only male in attendance, or one of a small handful of males. Recovery support does exist for you. In the act of reaching out for help, COSA men have concerns regarding an overwhelmingly female fellowship. Men-only meetings are not common within the COSA program at this time. We hope that some of your concerns regarding being a minority and attending mixed meetings may be addressed within this special section. We suggest that you talk to other men in the fellowship to get an understanding of how this program works for men. You will find that you are not alone and that the balance and serenity can become a part of your daily life. As it is true for all genders, the key to recovery lie in working the 12 steps of COSA with a sponsor. The ISO of COSA offers a dedicated way for men who want information about our program. If you're a man whose life has become unmanageable because of another's compulsive sexual behavior and you would feel more comfortable corresponding with another man, please reach out to us and let us know. Your message will be answered by a trusted male servant from the COSA Fellowship. And so I thought this would be a great reading, setting up Chris's share. And I will be putting a link to the COSA website with this page in the show notes for this episode. We have heard from other men in the COSA program and have shared some of their stories here on the podcast, including episode 49 with the husband of one of my friends, Brian T. And so when Chris talks about entering the rooms of COSA as a minority in the program, we know that he is not alone. Before turning it over to Chris's share, I wanted to mention at the end of this episode, I have a few comments from the YouTube channel that I wanted to respond to, as well as sharing a few songs. This one will be a quick episode. So without further ado, here is Chris C. speaking at the May SAA COSA speaker meeting. I hope you enjoy.
I'm Chris, recovering COSA, because my life has been affected by compulsive sexual behavior. And thank you, Carrie. Yeah, thanks for that introduction. Yeah, I feel loved by the members of our fellowship that have shown up to support me tonight, and that feels really good. I think I'm going to kind of break it up into 4 parts. I'll call it the first part is FOO, family of origin, kind of what got me here, how recovery started. Then there was a 9-year gap, and then how recovery restarted, and that's when actually COSA started. And then what it's like today. Yeah, so raised by an incested mom, right, who kind of hated and feared men. Higher power gave her 3 sons, so I don't know what that's about. But my dad was and still is the gentlest soul I've ever met, finder of teachable moments. From him, I learned that the healing powers of just softness and gentleness. And I feel like I channel my dad in my work as a sponsor basically every day. At 3 years old, I experienced an act of sexual violence against me by my mom. I suppressed that memory till after she died in 2017. The actual act of violence was actually less damaging in the long run than the dark room that I retreated to in considerable pain, emotional and physical. That was kind of the beginning of my lifelong self-imposed isolation, really. Rampant self-sufficiency, just really doing my very best not to rely upon anybody else and not let anybody else close to me. And just the absolute surprise and the way the situation swung from me being a kid to me being punished for something I had no idea that I'd done anything wrong. So trust is hard to come by. Trust in a sexual situation is especially hard to come by. Other than that, there was, more open effects of being raised by an incested mom. Her dating advice kind of added up to, and she said this like verbatim and, a finger wagging at me, you need to right all the wrongs that men have done to women over the years, right? That was my responsibility when I, started thinking about girls at age, 12, 13-ish. That didn't help a bit. And it didn't turn me into any sort of superhero protector of women either. What it really put in my mind was that men are a menace, potential danger to women, and that I'd better be very careful. So I really didn't date until late in college. And I pretty much glommed on to the first woman who really showed any serious interest. That woman is still my partner. We celebrated our 40th wedding anniversary this summer. I'm not quite sure how it worked, and it kind of has. And it's also been a pretty bumpy road. I also lost connection with my higher power around age 10. I was forced to do a Bible study. It's the only thing I ever rebelled against. I was just such a good boy. I never got kicked out of class in school, never had to have those parent-teacher conferences, but I just kept challenging the teacher. I said, well, what does this make sense? I can't figure it out. And they eventually kicked me out of class. And my mom never made me go back. But I pretty much then I just said, this is all bullshit. So met my partner, and 7 years into that coupleship, she declared herself to be an SAA. Took her a while to figure out how to get there. She started in AA and eventually found SAA. I was completely blindsided, felt a lot of shame and pain, and was really at the place of like, it's her problem, and really was just kind of like killing time until she was, better. At least that was my initial attitude. But really, in hindsight, I was very emotionally shut down. And because of the emotional isolation that I mentioned earlier, I was very difficult to access, right? I really didn't share myself. And quite honestly, in that time period, I was questioning myself whether I was even capable of loving anybody. But we did RCA together, and I went to something called PSIA, Partners of Survivors of Incest Anonymous. I don't know if it still exists, but yep. So that was my first introduction to the 12 steps. So much shame. And, part of the damage, my mom said, I remember her saying one time, when trying to share my feelings, you're just trying to get people to feel sorry for you. And so I basically, first couple of years, pretty much shared with the carpet. I really couldn't meet anybody's eye because felt I was trying to suck them into my story, and that wasn't allowed. And I didn't deserve anybody to take care of me. I didn't have a higher power then. I basically did a swear word, beep sound over the God when the steps were read, but it still had an effect on me, right? I mean, it was still working its magic, however slowly, and to the extent that I let it, and it was working. I know that my daughter's 31 right now, and I know we started recovery 35 years ago, right? When she first declared herself an SAA, and we got into RCA, and that was primary what we worked together. And in doing that, we realized that, and I think we'd waited 9 years before we decided to have children. And we got into the recovery after 7 years, and we'd been holding off. And I know for myself that neither of us, I think, were quite willing to trust the other to be a parent and co-parent well together. And getting the 12 steps got both of us to that point. And I remember, she was hugely pregnant in an RCA meeting, and we basically declared everybody in the room godparents to our first kid. And they really were. I mean, we wouldn't have gotten there without them and the experience, strength, and hope we got from that room. And then we next, tried to go to an RCA meeting with a squalling baby. It was a real struggle. And we stopped 12-step cold turkey for 9 years. Yeah. And then the restart, partner had a relapse, and in that time, we were in a really good glider, but it was heading to the ground. And there was no 12-step lift beneath our wings. And we learned a lot, and we practiced some of the lessons we learned, but without the, the daily, weekly reminder, it's no wonder we ended up where we ended up. So my partner's relapse, we turned to RCA. First meeting back, we were at a speaker meeting, and the speaker couple were SAA COSAs. I hated being back. I really hated being back. Felt like we were failures as a couple, felt a lot of shame again. But every word that couple said in their shares just it rang true. And I couldn't deny it as much as I wanted to. And after the meeting, the COSA of the couple, heard a little bit of our story and said, you might want to look at how it is you picked an SAA out of a crowded room. That was 21 years ago this month. And I really have never stopped going to COSA since. I could not ignore that truth, that statement. The deeper I looked, I realized that I'd actually picked an incest survivor out of a crowded room. And it made perfect sense. My mom was an incest survivor. My partner's an incest survivor. A strange part of my brain just felt right at home, and I knew what to do. So coming into the rooms, and this was the first time I'd ever really decided that this was my program. I'm going to work this for me. I kind of knew that right away. And I got the immediate relief of simply not being alone. in those rooms. But there was also that fear of men being a danger to women, lurking in the back of my mind when I was in those rooms. Maybe that's why I look so damn scared, Carrie, but there are plenty of other reasons too. And I also realized I didn't have a higher power at the time, and it took me a while yet. But looking back, I realized that just stepping into that room was my first almost unconscious acknowledgement that I didn't have all the answers, right? That there was something greater than what I could provide out there that I needed to listen to. I remember listening to a first share early on after coming in there, and that person had a terrible experiences at the hands of men, and I was literally shaking. Just it was my first exposure to just some of the crap that has been done by people to people. But I felt guilty. I felt like I was part of the problem in that moment, in that room. I had to exit a little early, and people came out and found me and kind of talked me down. So I'm grateful for that. But, for the first 10 years in COSA, I kind of stayed aloof, a little on the edges. I attended regularly. I worked the steps. I worked slowly, a step a year was my pace. Wouldn't recommend it to anybody. But, 12 years after I joined, when I finally finished, I said, well, at least it's baked in deep. And it really is. But raising kids and being a natural procrastinator, yeah. But having that sense of being a monster, that there was something lurking inside me, was really held me back from jumping into the we of the program and really leaning into everything that the program could provide. And strangely, my co-sponsor was the exception to that. For some reason, I was able to connect with her. We've been co-sponsors for like 19 years. For some reason, it never felt like it was going to be a danger to her. Thank God that higher power decided to give my insanity a pass with her. And there came a point when I thought I shared something that had completely offended people. And I was really considering leaving the program. And I started to share this fear with people and found out that other COSAs have felt like they were too toxic for the program and they should leave and stuff. And so on a meeting level, I shared that fear. And really ever since, I've been getting that message that there isn't any monster here. And I talk about it sometimes, and at a retreat or something, I'll say something, and, a COSA will come up to me afterwards and just give me a hug and kind of whisper in my ear, there's no monster here. And for people to listen to me and notice me like that and care enough to come up to me afterwards and tell me that, yeah, it feels like love. And it's so healing to be noticed in that way. And so I went to my first retreat, and 50 to 1. There were 50 women there and me. And I realized sometimes shorthand, I'll say, yeah, I got my 50 sisters. And that's my program, 50 sisters. But the growth that happened once I decided to join the we and allow myself the we was immense. And then came the question, like, how close is appropriate? Because we share everything. And I get to see exactly how wonderful these people are and how much they mean to me. And so, quite frankly, the use of the word sisters is very deliberate, right? And I really have to think about my boundaries with my COSA sisters and what's appropriate, and what I can ask of them and what they can ask of me. COSA has become really my church. It's my sanctuary. It's my cause. It nurtures me in many, many ways. And for me to violate the boundaries of any one of my sisters, I would feel like I've just gone and taken a shit between the pews of my church. That would, that's the last thing I want to do. So I was growing emotionally and working my steps hard. And so like what to do with that? Well, I decided that I was going to sail single-handed to Hawaii. There's a sailboat race that goes on. And of course, it was the push of 12-step that kind of got me there. I remember I would take groups of COSAs out for, COSA Day on the Bay. We'd go to Angel Island, have a little lunch, and hike to the top of Angel Island there. And, I'd been kind of thinking about doing this, and my mom had died. And after all that, it was like running out of time, and to tell my COSAs, right, that I can't see getting everything done. And they basically said, Chris, if you don't go do the things you can do, and higher power removes the obstacles that you don't think you can remove yourself, then where would you be? And of course, they were right. And so it's really the first thing I'd ever done where I decided that I didn't have to know or see every step of the way, and trust my higher power, trust that things are going to work out and it's going to be okay. And also decided that I was willing to risk failing, because that, I'd never done anything like that. I'd always needed to see every step of the way, and I wasn't willing to risk the failure, because there was a lot of shame around failure, of course. And I did it. And that's the first time I'd ever really done that. Trusted higher power. I would fantasize about doing great things, but never actually take the steps. And this is the first time I had ever done it in my life, and have essentially made that a very deliberate practice since then. I mean, that was a huge life lesson. And then I used to think that isolation, being alone, was actually renewing my inner being. 2 weeks of complete isolation from humanity as I sailed to Hawaii showed me that actually isolation is my poison. And that sense of feeling renewed by isolating was actually just me avoiding. It's the inner kid kind of trying to find safety in an otherwise hostile world, and just staying away. And now that I'd found a community that loved me and supported me, and then isolating myself from that community, and I rolled into Hanalei Bay, feeling like I had completely failed in every aspect of that race, that I missed my opportunity. I spent a whole bunch of money for no reason, that I'd raced poorly, that I'd broken the boat, just a terrible mindset, right? And being alone with my inner critic for 2 weeks, I didn't really know I had such a powerful inner critic, but man, it took over. It really took over. And I met with my co-sponsor after I got back, and this was weeks later, I still felt like really shitty. And she's a diminutive person and very quiet and very gentle. And she grabbed me by my shirt and she said, I'm not letting you leave here until you kick the idea to the curb that you did terrible. Be noticed and loved again. Like that, man, to have people on your side like that, man, that's the silver lining of being in recovery, is you find a situation like this. And so I eventually figured out how to ignore. Holy shit. I only have 5 minutes left. Oh man. All right. Speeding up. Yeah. So that suppressed memory, it started coming up after my mom died. It took a year to even accept that it was even remotely valid memory. I went to my therapist and said, is this a valid memory? And he didn't answer. He said, when do you want to do your EMDRs? And I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. So it was a year before I went and did those. And I was able, once I finally did it, I was able to completely change that memory. I brought my COSAs into that room, and they stopped the act from happening. They took that naked 3-year-old and wrapped him in a blanket and took him to the room, opened the blinds, filled that room with light and COSA chatter, helped that little 3-year-old tie his shoes. Really one of the most powerful experiences in my life. And now that memory isn't a memory of pain and shame. It's a powerful, good memory. I'm going to skip, in the interest of time, the second Transpac, which I did this summer. Well, all right, I'm going to go into it anyway. Sorry. I was able to bring a support system with me this time. I learned the lessons. because of advances in technology, essentially had broadband on the boat. So I had a text circle, and I'd fire up the broadband, send out a bunch of texts, got a bunch of text and quick response. It sustained me. I broke my boom 200 miles from Kauai and rolled into Honolulu Bay, which has no marine services, just feeling very insecure. Like, this was kind of the closest to the edge of feeling like really defeated, that my life was just going to fall apart if I didn't do everything right. I had to ask for help. So there's this guy that supports the race. He's an islander, of course. And he got on the job and he said, "Chris, if you can get that boom off the boat and on the beach, I'll take care of you." And he did. Turned out he was a friend of Bill. And being with this guy for the whole day, every act that he did that day was an act of service. And this higher power showing up when I needed the most and expected it at least. I expected to have a battle to get this boat back together. I expected it to be hard. This guy found like the best welder on the island, And then at the end of the day, so what else can I do for you? And of course, me was going to say nothing. I'm like, "You need help," So I asked for the other thing that I thought I needed. He said, "Give me a day," and he found it. Yeah. So just leaning into my community was wonderful. What's it like today? Well, it's not perfect, but I started my steps again at the beginning of this year. I got a lot of anorexia in my marriage right now for the last 5 years. And I've been medicating the feelings around that. And that medicating has allowed me to accept really an unhealthy situation. And I'm really intensely ashamed to say that I've been using porn to help me medicate. So yesterday, I revealed that in a meeting, in a face-to-face meeting. And I got nothing from love, even though I'm intensely ashamed of that activity. And so I'm growing again, and I'm close to my higher power again. That feels good. And I got work to do. And 21 years and still got another fucking layer of the onion. 12 step today, I'm in service to my higher power on a daily basis. I've realized that when I see a newcomer, I just can't walk away from that newcomer's pain. I'm just compelled to be of some assistance. Those of you who have heard me speak know that poetry isn't often part of what you have to endure. And there's a poem that I've read over the years. Well, it's in a book that's really helped me understand the loving nature of my higher power. And it kind of summarizes for me the 12th step. It's called Otherwise the Darkness. I have a cause. We need those, don't we? Otherwise the darkness and the cold gets in and everything starts to ache. My soul has a purpose. It is to love. If I do not fulfill my heart's vocation, I suffer. So thank you for listening. Love you all.
Many, many thanks to Chris. I really loved his share. His vulnerability was just amazing. And the stories that he had of sailing solo across over to Hawaii, absolutely inspiring. One of the songs that I'm going to be playing at the end of this episode does relate to sailing. But before getting to that, I did want to get to some YouTube comments. We had 2 over the past few weeks that came up. And this one can be found on episode 28 with COSA Speaker meeting Carrie M. I did want to mention this earlier in the recording, that Carrie was the one that introduced Chris at the May Speaker meeting. So it says, "Thank you for your courage. I'm trying to start a meeting place, but there is so much shame and defiance in finding a church that will accept people who've been abused, neglected, and shown pornography at a very young age. So yeah, I did want to respond to this. I'm going to try to type something out on YouTube. But one of the things that I found when looking to start a meeting, churches are a great place to hold 12-step meetings, but they are not the only places. There are community centers. Hospitals often have rooms for 12-step meetings. Post-COVID, it's a little bit harder to do that. I know that we had several of our meetings pre-COVID were in hospitals. During COVID, due to safety, a lot of those meetings had to close the in-person, and it became really hard to get them started back. But hospitals are another place to look. Like I had mentioned, community centers often have rooms available. I know that one of our meetings in between churches, we did have a different issue with the church. The church that we had been meeting had been bought out by another church. And because we didn't carry the same religious message as the church, we had to find another place. But yeah, we found a meeting space at a pizza place. It was a little awkward, but we did have a private room there in the back. So there are lots of other options. The other thing that I could mention is when trying to initially reach out to a church to let them know that you're a 12-step meeting and don't necessarily divulge the exact specifics of the sexual part of our programs, whether you're trying to get an SAA meeting started or a COSA meeting. The place that we have, our noon room, it took us a few months of interviews and things to make sure that they felt comfortable. And since then, we've had a great bond with the church and have been able to open up several other meetings at the same church throughout the week. So there are other options out there available, and I wish you luck in your endeavor. And I'll be typing this in the comment section as well. The next comment comes from episode 162, where Albert shared his first step. And it simply says, "Albert, thank you so much for sharing your story. God loves you so much." Thank you so much for that comment, and he is part of my daily meeting, and so the next time I see him, I will pass along this lovely message. So not many emails to really share here. I've got correspondence going with 3 other people that I'm going to be talking to over the next few weeks, but not much in the way of feedback. So for the rest of this episode, I did have 2 songs that I wanted to share, and I had mentioned before that the first one related to Chris's stories of sailing solo from California over to Hawaii. And it's a song from my childhood, and I loved hearing the story behind it. It is Christopher Cross and his song Sailing. And so if I can remember this story correctly, I heard it probably 15 years ago or so, that Christopher had a difficult childhood, but he had a friend of the family who would take him out sailing, and that was like the only place where he felt at peace. I remember this song from when I was growing up, and I still love it. And reading through some of the lyrics, I thought that it was particularly fitting for a recovery song as well. So here is Christopher Cross with the song Sailing.
It's not far back, Santa. At least it's not from me. Wind is right, you can sail away, find serenity. Oh, the canvas can do miracles. Just you wait and see, then you believe me. Sailing takes me away to where I've always needed to be.
Such a beautiful tune. Love it. The other song, moving in a completely different direction, that I wanted to play was a video that came out a few weeks ago for an artist that I've played here on the podcast recently named Vagunder. So Vagunder is an Australian artist who taps into the Nordic Viking type of music. And I love this sentence here, Vigundra aims to raise levels of vibration from deep within so that you may feel deeply connected with what was long ago, awakening the primal connection to nature, our ancestors, and to spirit. So she released a song called Droomspeaker, which means dream speaker. And this is what she posted on Facebook. Navigating the realms of light and shadow, darkness is ever awaiting to gain a foothold on our consciousness. Through the growing of awareness, its face is revealed, and with our choice, we are either consumed or our own light comes to aid us as we find a way back to truth. And wow, does that ever sound like a message of recovery. I have been using this song for meditation. It's just got this great low drone from throat singing and just really spaced out, and absolutely love it. So I wanted to share here on the podcast Vigundra with the song Droomspeaker. So hypnotic. Love the song. So I find a connection to my higher power through music, and not only music that I'm listening to, but this past weekend got to go out and see one of my program friends. He plays in a band, went out and just totally vibed to the music, dancing and everything, and got to see a few other program friends there as well. So it was just one of those outer circle moments. Loved it. So with that, I'm going to close out this episode. If you had any feedback for the podcast or any songs to share, you can reach us at feedback@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. If you wanted to get a hold of me personally to be a guest on the podcast, have any questions about the podcast or the program of SAA, you can reach me at jason@sexaddictsrecoverypod.com. I'm so grateful for all of you that have tuned into this episode. And as always, keep coming back. The views and opinions contained in the Sex Addicts Recovery Podcast are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect those of the Bay Area Intergroup or the ISO of SAA.